The Grand Hall of Consumption buzzed with the sounds of 12 galaxies worth of apex predators, trying very hard not to eat each other. This was, as you might imagine, rather difficult. The annual Galactic Predator Summit had strict rules about not devouring your fellow delegates, no matter how tasty they looked, but that didn't stop anyone from thinking about it. Grand Chancellor Fang, whose 9 heads were each experiencing a different flavor of anxiety, watched the assembled delegates from his position at the central podium. His middle head, the one responsible for diplomatic relations, cleared its throat into the sound amplifier. Distinguished hunters, stalkers, and devourers of the 12 galaxies, all 9 heads spoke in unison, creating an unsettling chorus that immediately captured everyone's attention. We gather here today to address what can only be described as an unprecedented crisis. In the third row, Commander Velox, whose species had evolved from something resembling a cheetah crossed with a rocket engine, twitched irritably. His spotted fur bristled with static electricity, a sure sign he was getting impatient. Next to him, Queen Toxica burbled ominously in her containment sphere, the acid that composed her body casting strange shadows on nearby delegates. "I move to skip the traditional ritual of dominance display," called out Admiral Crix, his crystalline exoskeleton clicking as he raised one of his 17 appendages. "The matter at hand is too urgent." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Skipping the ritual of dominance display was practically unheard of. It had been a cornerstone of their meetings since the first summit, where everyone had agreed that it was better to formally posture at each other than to actually fight. The fact that Admiral Crix would suggest such a thing meant this was serious indeed. Chancellor Fang's rightmost head began stress-eating a nearby decorative plant while his leftmost head tried to maintain order. "The motion is noted," his diplomatic head managed. "All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Even the swarm mind of Sector 7, which usually voted against everything on principle, raised all 1,000 of its tentacles in agreement. "Very well," Chancellor Fang continued, his heads now all focused intently on the assembled crowd. "We are here to discuss the Earth problem." The mere mention of the word Earth sent a visible shudder through the assembly. Admiral Crix's crystal structure briefly lost coherence. Queen Toxica's acid began to boil. Commander Velox's fur stood so straight he looked like a particularly agitated dandelion. "For those who haven't been briefed," Chancellor Fang pressed on, "Earth is a class-death world in the unfashionable western spiral arm of the Milky Way. It is inhabited by a species that calls themselves humans. And they are." All 9 heads paused dramatically. "Problematic." "Problematic?" scoffed Commander Velox, his voice cracking like a sonic boom. "That's like calling a supernova a mild inconvenience. They're absolutely insane." "Order!" shouted Chancellor Fang's disciplinarian head, while his diplomatic head tried to soothe the rising tension. "We will proceed with Admiral Crix's presentation of evidence." "Admiral, if you would." Admiral Crix rose from his crystalline perch, his faceted body refracting light across the chamber as he made his way to the podium. The assembled predators settled in, knowing they were about to witness something both fascinating and horrifying. None of them were prepared for just how horrifying it would be. "My fellow apex predators," Admiral Crix began, his voice resonating through his crystal form like wind through wind chimes. "What I am about to show you may disturb you. It may frighten you. It may cause you to question everything you thought you knew about what it means to be a dominant species. But we must face this threat with open eyes and steeled nerves." He paused, his crystalline structure vibrating with anticipation. "Because the humans? They're not just surviving on their death world. They're treating it like a playground." Admiral Crix activated the hollow projector, and the chamber darkened. The first image flickered to life. A human in what appeared to be primitive protective gear, poking a stick at one of their planet's most dangerous predators. "This," Admiral Crix explained, his crystal form trembling slightly, "is what the humans call a wildlife documentary. They intentionally seek out dangerous creatures for entertainment." Queen Toxica's containment sphere fogged up with agitation. "Entertainment? Surely you mean military training?" "No," all 9 of Chancellor Fang's heads said grimly. "They do this for fun, and it gets worse." "Admiral, show them the next clip." The image changed to show a human deliberately jumping out of a perfectly functional atmospheric vehicle. "They call this skydiving," Admiral Crix continued. "They climb to dangerous heights in their primitive aircraft, and then they jump out. For pleasure." But they have some kind of emergency teleportation device, right?" Commander Velox asked, his fur crackling with nervous energy. "They use a piece of fabric. They call it a parachute. Sometimes it doesn't open. The assembly erupted in horrified chittering, bubbling, and various other species-specific expressions of distress. And here, Admiral Crix pushed on, changing the image again. We have humans engaging in something called spicy food challenges. The footage showed humans deliberately consuming substances that were clearly causing them pain, while other humans cheered them on. Are they being tortured? Asked a representative from the Silicon Hive Mind, their metallic voice quavering. Number. They are doing this voluntarily. They have taken plants that evolved chemical defenses specifically to prevent being eaten. And they. Admiral Crix's crystal structure briefly flickered with distress. They made them into a sport. Chancellor Feng's heads were all wearing different expressions of horror, except for the one that was still stress-eating plants. But surely, Commander Vlox interjected, standing up so quickly he left after images, surely they are a weak species physically? These must be exceptional specimens? Admiral Crix's crystal form pulsed with what might have been a laugh. Let me show you their average endurance capabilities. The next series of images showed humans running for absolutely ridiculous distances. Marathon runners. Ultra-marathon runners. People running across entire continents. They call this hitting the wall, Admiral Crix explained, showing footage of an exhausted runner. This is the point where their bodies run out of easily accessible energy. And do you know what they do then? The assembly leaned forward collectively. They keep going anyway. Their bodies begin consuming their own fat reserves. And they just keep running. Queen Toxica's acid began to swirl in agitated patterns. This is a violation of basic survival protocols. No sensible species would. Oh, it gets better. Admiral Crix interrupted, his crystal form now fully committed to what appeared to be a nervous breakdown. Let me show you what happened when we sent the Standard Invasion Scout Force to their planet last solar cycle. The footage shifted to show a small scouting ship landing in something called a Kansas. Within moments, several humans had approached the ship. The universal translator kicked in. Hey Earl, you reckon this here's one of them UFOs? Yep. Want to see if they'll join the county fair? Could put them right between the pig racing and the corn dog stand. The assembly watched in horror as the humans proceeded to treat a terrifying alien encounter like it was some kind of entertaining diversion. They invited the scout force to something called a barbecue. They asked to take selfies with them. One elderly human even pinched what she called the cute little cheeks of the scout force commander. The scout force retreated in panic, but not before being given several paper plates full of something called potato salad and an invitation to return next year. This, Admiral Crix declared, his crystal form now vibrating at a frequency that threatened to shatter nearby glasses, is why we are here today. The humans are not just surviving on a death world, they're not just thriving on a death world. They are treating a death world like it's some kind of amusement park. And now they're starting to look up at the stars with that same gleam in their eyes. The assembly fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of Chancellor Feng's stress-eating head choking on a particularly tough leaf. And we haven't even gotten to their fiction yet, Admiral Crix added ominously. Wait until you see what they imagine for fun. The chamber erupted into chaos. Commander Velox was moving so fast from agitation that he had created 3 small sonic booms. Queen Toxica's containment sphere was now a swirling maelstrom of anxiety acid. The Silicon Hive Mind had started stress calculating pi to the billionth digit. Order, order, shouted Chancellor Feng's disciplinarian head while his diplomatic head took a moment to hyperventilate. We will maintain decorum in this chamber, or by the great devourers, I will end this session right now. The threat of early adjournment managed to restore some semblance of calm. Commander Velox finally stopped vibrating long enough to become visible again. Now then, Chancellor Feng's diplomatic head continued, we will hear proposals for dealing with the Earth situation. Commander Velox, since you're already partially phased into a higher dimension from anxiety, you may speak first. Commander Velox materialized at the podium in a blur of motion. The solution is obvious. We are apex predators. We should simply... He paused, his spotted fur rippling with uncertainty. We should, perhaps, challenge them to a race? A race? Queen Toxica's acidic form bubbled with derision. Did you not see the evidence? They run until their bodies fail, and then they just keep going. They have competitions to see who can run across continents. What happens when they lose to you and they decide they need to train harder? Well, what's your suggestion then? Velox snapped, his tail lashing fast enough to generate small electrical discharges. Queen Toxica's containment sphere floated to the podium. Quarantine. Total isolation. We put up warning beacons around their entire solar system. We tell everyone to stay away. We never speak to them. We never let them know we exist. We just leave them alone. Oh yes, brilliant, Commander Velox sneered, leaving speed after images of his sarcastic expressions. And what happens when they develop FTL travel? Because they will. Have you seen their science fiction? They've been planning for it for centuries. They've already thought of ways to kill every single species in this room, and we haven't even met them yet. The Silicon Hive Mind's representative raised several appendages. Perhaps we could attempt peaceful contact? Share knowledge? Guide them toward a more reasonable way of life? Admiral Crix's crystal form chimed with hollow laughter. Let me show you what happened when we tried sending them subtle messages through crop circles. The holoprojector flickered to life again, showing a series of beautiful, mathematically perfect crop designs. The next image showed what the humans had done in response. They had started making their own crop circles. For fun. There were now competitions for the best crop art. Someone had made a crop circle of something called a dick butt. They turned our attempts at higher mathematical communication into an art form, Admiral Crix explained. They thought it was entertaining. They made t-shirts. The Silicon Hive Mind's representative sat down with a clank of defeat. From the back of the chamber, a small voice spoke up. It was Professor Zizd, the ancient space dust mite. So tiny he had to use a magnification field just to be visible. The chamber fell silent when the oldest living being in 12 galaxies spoke. You listened. You're all missing the point, Professor Zizd said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. The humans aren't just surviving on a death world. They're not just turning everything into entertainment. They're doing something far, far worse. Chancellor Fang's heads all turned toward the professor. What could be worse? Professor Zizd floated to the podium, his magnification field humming. They're getting better at it. Everything they do, every crazy, death-defying, physics-challenging thing, they're improving, breaking records, setting new goals, and they're teaching their children to do the same. A horrified silence fell over the chamber. Did you know, Professor Zizd continued, that they have a saying? Hold my beer. It's what they say right before they do something so monumentally stupid that it circles right back around to genius. And it works. Somehow, it works. Queen Toxica's acid began to emit a faint whimper. I've studied them for 3 of their centuries, Professor Zizd declared. And I can tell you this, they're not going to stop. They're never going to stop. And someday, probably sooner than any of us are comfortable with, they're going to look up at the stars and say those terrible, terrible words. The entire assembly held their breath, or their equivalent respiratory functions. Hold my beer, watch this. Professor Zoo's declaration had left the chamber in a state of existential dread. Even the swarm mind of Sector 7, which prided itself on being unfazable, had curled all 1,000 of its tentacles into a defensive ball. Professor, Chancellor Fang's academic head spoke up while his other heads were busy having various grades of panic attacks. You've studied these humans for 3 centuries. Please, tell us more about what makes them so unique. The ancient space dust mite adjusted his magnification field and pulled up his own set of holo images. Let me show you something that should terrify all of you. This is what humans call a zoo. The image showed humans carefully caring for and feeding creatures that could easily kill them. Now, every species has had the idea of capturing and displaying dangerous creatures. But humans? They rehabilitate injured predators. They hand-raise orphaned murder beasts. They give them names like Fluffy and Mr. Whiskers. And then, this is the truly insane part, they release them back into the wild. Commander Velox's fur had gone completely flat from shock. But why? Because they think it's the right thing to do, Professor Zizd said. They have this concept called conservation. They actively work to prevent species that could kill them from going extinct. Queen Toxica's acid turned a pale, sickly color. That's against every survival instinct in the known galaxies. Oh, it gets better, Professor Zizd continued. Let me show you their medical practices. The next image showed a human surgery. When their bodies break, instead of sensibly dying like any normal species, they invented something called medicine. They cut themselves open, remove the broken parts, and put in new parts. Sometimes these parts are from their own bodies. Sometimes they're mechanical. Sometimes they're from other species entirely. And then they just keep going. Surely they must have some limits? The Silicon Hive Mind's representative asked hopefully. They invented something called extreme sports because regular sports weren't dangerous enough. Professor Zizd replied. They climb frozen waterfalls. They jump off cliffs wearing nothing but a wingsuit. They ride giant waves of dihydrogen monoxide for fun. One of them jumped from the edge of space just to see if he could. The chamber collectively shuddered. But here's the truly terrifying part, Professor Zoost said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire hall. They think this is all normal. They evolved on a death world with such high gravity that their bones had to become internal armor. Their planet is constantly trying to kill them with everything from weather to plate tectonics, and they think this is fine. They invented something called insurance to deal with it. Insurance? Chancellor Fang's curiosity head couldn't help asking. It's a system where they pay money regularly so that when, not if, when, something terrible happens to them, they can get help fixing it. They have institutionalized the certainty of disaster into their economy. The silicon hive mind began to emit a high-pitched whine of distress. And their adaptability. Professor Zoost was really warming to his subject now. They can survive in nearly any environment on their death world. Too cold? They make clothes and buildings. Too hot? They invented air conditioning. Too wet? They make boats. Too dry? They drill for water. Not enough oxygen? They bring their own. But surely they must have some weaknesses, Commander Velox asked desperately. Oh yes, Professor Zeus replied. They're quite fragile individually. They break easily. They're vulnerable to all sorts of things. But that's what makes them so dangerous. They know they're fragile, so they plan for it. They expect things to go wrong. They prepare for disaster. And when something does break them, they get excited about the prosthetic options. Prosthetic options? Queen Toxica burbled nervously. Oh yes, they turn their injuries into upgrades. I once observed a human who lost a leg in something called motorcycle accident. Instead of dying respectably, he got a new leg made of metal and then proceeded to learn how to dance with it. Dance. He turned a devastating injury into a hobby. The chamber was now so quiet you could hear the individual atoms of Admiral Crix's crystal structure vibrating with anxiety. And their information sharing, Professor Zoost continued, seemingly unaware of the growing horror in his audience. They have this thing called the internet where they share everything they learn. Everything. One human figures out how to survive something impossible, and within days millions of humans know about it. And what do they do with this knowledge? He paused for effect. They tried to do it better. The chamber had descended into pure chaos. The silicon hive mind was trying to self-destruct. Commander Velox had achieved a state of quantum uncertainty from running in circles too quickly. Queen Toxica's containment sphere was emitting sounds that suggested her acid was trying to cry. The swarm mind of Sector 7 had stress-eaten 3 chairs. All 9 of Chancellor Fang's heads were talking at once, creating a cacophony of procedural confusion until his diplomatic head finally got control of the sound amplifier. Silence. The room froze. Commander Velox rematerialized mid-stride. Queen Toxica's acid stopped sloshing. Even the swarm mind spat out the half-digested chair it was working on. We will, Chancellor Fang's diplomatic head declared while his administrative head frantically shuffled papers. Have an official vote. The motion on the floor, as proposed by Queen Toxica and amended by our subsequent descent into panic, is as follows. His legal head cleared its throat and read, Motion 47B. To declare the Sol system, particularly the third planet known as Earth and its dominant species humans, as a Class OH no zone, requiring the immediate installation of warning beacons at all standard approach vectors, the removal of all observation posts, and the implementation of a strict "we were never here" policy. I second the motion, shouted about 30 different delegates at once. Point of order. The Silicon Hive Mind's representative raised a slightly shaking appendage. Shouldn't we discuss the implications of... They were cut off by Admiral Crix playing one last clip. Humans approaching an active volcano to take something called a selfie. Never mind, the Silicon Hive Mind's representative sat back down with a clank. Motion seconded. Very well. All of Chancellor Fang's heads spoke in unison, creating an unsettling chorus of bureaucratic terror. We will now vote on Motion 47B. Please note that this would be the first time in galactic history that all 12 galaxies have agreed to collectively avoid a single species. They would be proud of that. Professor Zoost commented dryly. They'd probably make a documentary about it. A collective shudder ran through the chamber. All those in favor of declaring Earth a Class OH no zone and implementing the "we were never here" policy, raise your appendages, tentacles, probability fields, or other appropriate indicating mechanisms. The vote was not so much unanimous as it was desperate. Commander Velox raised his paw so fast he temporarily achieved time travel, and his vote was counted twice. Queen Toxica's acid formed itself into a shape that meant yes in 12 different languages. The swarm mind raised all 1,000 tentacles and borrowed a few more from a neighboring species just to be sure. All those opposed? The silence was broken only by the sound of Chancellor Fang's stress-eating head choking on another leaf. Motion carried, declared Chancellor Fang's administrative head while his anxiety head began drafting a letter of resignation. We will begin immediate implementation of the warning beacons and… He was interrupted by a small alert from the chamber's long-range sensors. Professor Zood floated over to check it, his magnification field flickering with what might have been amusement. Ah, he said. It seems the humans have just launched another one of their space exploration vehicles. They're calling this one Perseverance. The name alone should tell you everything you need to know about why we're making the right decision here. The chamber began implementing evacuation protocols before he even finished speaking. The implementation of Operation We Were Never Here proceeded with unprecedented efficiency. Apex predators from 12 galaxies working together in perfect harmony, united by their collective desire to be absolutely anywhere else. Warning beacons were installed at all standard approach vectors to the Sol system. The beacons broadcast a simple message in all known languages, including 17 that hadn't been invented yet. Danger, Class O, No Zone, contains humans. Turn back now, this is not a test. Seriously, just don't. The observation posts were dismantled in record time. Several observers had to be treated for psychological trauma after their final shifts. One had made the mistake of watching something called Jackass and had to be placed in permanent therapy. Professor Zoost established a long-range monitoring station at what he considered a safe distance, approximately 3 galaxies away. From there, he continued to observe and document humanity's progression, sending regular reports that were treated by most species as horror stories. 6 months after the beacons were installed, he sent an urgent message to the Council. The humans have spotted the warning beacons. Current human scientific consensus is that they are either space debris or probably Russian or Chinese satellites or something. Several humans have suggested trying to catch one to see what it does. Recommend immediate upgrade to stealth systems. The Council approved the upgrade in record time, using technology so advanced it made the beacons completely invisible to all known detection methods. 2 weeks later, another report arrived. Humans have noticed the beacons have vanished. They are now convinced this proves they were alien in origin. Several conspiracy theories have emerged. Most popular theories suggest beacons were installed by time-traveling humans from the future. Recommend changing galaxies. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued as normal. Humans kept doing what humans do best: surviving, thriving, and turning everything into an extreme sport. They broke records, pushed boundaries, and occasionally surprised themselves with their own resilience. A young human child looked up at the stars and asked, "Do you think there's anyone else out there?" Her mother smiled and replied, "If there is, I'm sure we'll meet them someday." 3 galaxies away, Professor ZZ watched this exchange through his long-range monitors and shuddered. In the decades that followed, the warning beacons became something of a legend among spacefaring races. The Sol system was marked on star charts with a simple symbol that meant both certain death and best avoided in every known language. Young apex predators were told scary stories about the humans to make them behave. But perhaps the most significant change was in galactic politics. For the first time in known history, 12 galaxies worth of apex predators had something they could all agree on. Wherever humans were, that's where they weren't going to be. And in the end, that might have been humanity's greatest achievement, accidentally creating peace among the stars through their sheer, terrifying existence. Though if you ask the humans, they'd probably try to turn it into a competition. Professor Z's final report before his retirement simply read, "They have begun planning for deep space exploration. Their first proposed project is called Hold My Beer Initiative. May the great devourers have mercy on us all." The report was sealed in a time capsule and shot into the heart of a black hole, just to be safe. Some things, the Council decided, were better left unknown. And somewhere on Earth, a human looked up at the stars and said those fateful words. "Hey y'all, watch this."